Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose. Cutting down to the truth through history and experience. Subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com. The next episode of The Scalpel starts now.
What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Are you waiting on a lightning strike? Are you waiting for the perfect night? Are you waiting till the time is right? What are you waiting for?
Welcome to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose. This has been a very difficult day for me. It's a day full of emotions. I have a lot of thoughts racing through my mind and have for quite some time. Not only about this day, but about where we are currently. September 11th, 2021. I hadn't planned to do a podcast this day. I just planned to kind of spend some time with my family and reflect. But then I got a phone call this morning. I got a call from someone overseas in Afghanistan, a very close contact. Now, this isn't a rumor of a rumor, but this is a direct call from someone that I know. And they told me they had just spoken to their sister, who lives in the Panjshir Valley, where the Taliban are attacking what's left of the duly elected government of Afghanistan and the soldiers that we trained and those in the resistance who are just fighting for freedom. He said, I speak to my sister every 2 days. She turns on the satellite phone. She calls and gives me an update. And this morning she told me that trucks were driving through all the Taliban-controlled areas of the Panjshir Valley, through every village, and they were rounding up every male child, 12 years old and older, every male. So anyone 12 and older, they were rounding up, and they were taking them away. And I asked him, where do you think they're going? And he says, there's no re-education camps. There's no place to keep them. They're taking them away to kill them. That's happening right now. That's happening right now as I look outside and it's sunny where I live in Texas. It's happening right now while I was driving to pick up my 12-year-old daughter from spending the night with her friend this morning. It's happening right now where I sit in my office surrounded by a lot of memories of the time I spent in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other countries. But on September 11th, 2021, we have every male 12 years old and older in the Panjshir that are being rounded up by the Taliban terrorists using weapons that they got from the United States of America, who are overtly supported now by the United States of America and recognized by the United States of America. And by this report, and I can tell you it's extremely accurate, most likely are committing a genocide against all males 12 years old and older. You may ask yourself, well, why are they using the arbitrary cutoff of 12? They use that because 20 years is a generation. And if you go back one generation and you get to maturity at 2021, 12 years old is that cutoff. That's where some young men enter puberty. And that's a generation, and they have to wipe out an entire generation's mind that they can think that they can revolt. Because they know if they don't do that, these children will grow up, remember the atrocities that were committed against their parents, and they will someday fight back. So they need to wipe out a generation so they don't remember. As we gather today on September 11th, we always use hashtag never forget. We have to remember. And 6,000 miles away, across the ocean, across the continent, a small group of terrorists are rounding up all the males 12 years old and older, because they don't want anyone left alive in that generation to remember what they did. They're going to wipe them out. So 20 years later, one generation later on 9/11, we need to remember. Because we have a whole generation now that has been indoctrinated in the United States of America by feckless, weak, pathetic leadership from our national government on the whole, and unfortunately a lot of state and local governorship, that have been indoctrinated to believe a narrative, a false statement, anything at all that basically could be summed up as see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. I've heard it said it's three-monkey diplomacy. It's definitely the diplomacy we use as we deal with Pakistan and Afghanistan, but it's also what our government's trying to do today. We have a State Department that says, see no evil. The Taliban are fine. They're our partners now. They're going to vet the lists of the people that helped us in Afghanistan, track them down and kill them when we were at war with the Taliban. They're going to help us vet those lists. So, see no evil, hear no evil. We're not going to let the actual news from Afghanistan come back to the United States of America. No, we don't want that. We want the Washington Post, the New York Times, the bulwarks of the Holocaust deniers to stand by and deny one more time a genocide that's taking place, or an atrocity or a malfeasance or an immoral act perpetrated on a nation where several of the people in that nation helped us and helped Americans return home. We want them to see no evil. We want them to hear no evil. And by God, we want them to speak no evil. That's why we have a cancel culture today. We have a cancel culture that says anything you say that doesn't fit a narrative, we have a special word for that. We call it misinformation. Remember, it's three-monkey diplomacy. We'll just call it misinformation when you call the truth, because we have think tanks, we have NGOs, we have the elite that will stand by and repeat a lie enough times till you believe it's true. And in the United States of America on September 11th, 2021, we've had a generation of advancing monkey diplomacy of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, that has come to a crescendo of COVID-19 crashing into a foreign policy disaster such as Afghanistan. And it has dragged the United States of America to its lowest point in the storied history of our nation. And it gives me no joy to say that. Now, before the powers that be try to monkey diplomacy me to say see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil, I'll just tell you how I got into all this. Because I'm no one special. I just was put on a path early in life, and it directed me to where I am today. It allowed me to see generationally what is happening to our nation, because I have been blessed to live literally in some of the greatest times in our nation, and unfortunately now during probably the darkest time, or one of the darkest times in our nation. As a young boy, I can remember being overseas with my parents. We were in the Middle East. It was in the mid-70s, I believe, and a war broke out between Israel and other Middle Eastern countries, and we were in Beirut on a tour that my father was leading. And my dad, I'll never forget, I believe I was 10, 11 years old, and my brother was 9. We had our own hotel room because my parents believed in personal responsibility, and the phone rang about 4 in the morning. Now, we didn't have cell phones, so the actual hotel phone rang. I answered it, and my father said, "Get your brother, get your passports in your bags, meet us downstairs in 15 minutes. Now, in the 1970s, you didn't argue with your parents. You didn't ask why. You didn't say, text me. You just did what they told you to. So I grabbed my little brother. I woke him up, and I won't lie, I smacked him with a pillow. I woke him up, and I grabbed his passport and mine, and I told him to pack his bag. Dad always told us when we were traveling, keep your bags packed and just have laid out what you're going to take the next day. So we grabbed up our suitcases, and we went downstairs and joined 40 other people in the tour who were waiting in the lobby of this large hotel. 2 buses pulled up, and they loaded our entire tour on these 2 buses with all of our bags. And my dad instructed everyone, we're going to go on a bus ride, and it's probably going to be a long time. Now, these buses did have lavatories, but the bus ride was going to be 36 hours. And I remember driving by multiple buildings thinking, ooh, I haven't seen those ruins before, but they had just been bombed. I remember hearing loud noises. I remember driving, and it was more than 2 hours. It turned out from that early morning to when we got to Damascus, Syria, 2 days. I was young, and I slept up in the baggage racks of the bus because I was a skinny little kid. And I remember when we got early, still dark in the morning to Damascus, Syria, to the airport, that someone met us at a gate. We didn't even go to the main building. And the 2 Jeeps that escorted us with men with what I saw were machine guns got out, went to the chain link fence, took some bolt cutters, cut the lock off, opened the chain link fence, and we drove out onto the tarmac of this airfield where a 737 was waiting. And we all loaded this plane. The plane was so full, in fact, my brother and I were the only children on the trip, that my brother and I were standing in the aisle when this plane took off. Now, remember, back in the 1970s, you could smoke on an airplane, and a lot of people were smoking on this airplane. There was a lot of palpable anxiety in the atmosphere. And I remember seeing my father. He had me standing with him up at the front of the plane, kind of sitting on his lap, and I was standing up looking out the window. And as the plane started to take off for Israel, we were going to go and end up ultimately on a kibbutz in Nafginesor to wait out this initial time in the conflict. My dad pointed to a large trail of what appeared to be buses coming up this winding road to the Damascus airport. From the height we were at, my dad said, those buses are still about 20 miles from this airport. And he said, did you see the buses that were at the airport? And I said, yes, sir. He goes, those people left when they were told to leave because all the tour guides were warned, get out of country now. And so my father took that to be gospel and got us out of the country, and we were fortunate to make a plane. He said, you see that long trail of buses coming up? He said, they were told to leave at the same time we were, but they hesitated. They didn't act. And now some of them won't make it out before the conflict gets more intense. And he looked at me and he says, you know how I always tell you you're responsible for your actions? And I said, yes, sir. He said, you're also responsible for your inactions. And the inactions of those leaders that were leading those tours may cost some of those people their lives. As a young boy, I never forgot that I was responsible for my inactions as much as my actions. So as I grew up, as I got older, for some reason, God had a great sense of humor. It led me into the intelligence world. And after 9/11, my life changed radically. I no longer had a 9-to-5 existence. I no longer got to enjoy my weekends, kite surfing, flying, because I love to fly. I used to even go to air shows and fly in air shows. No, my life changed radically to where I was gone a lot of the early years of my children. I would get a phone call and have to leave, and I didn't know when I was coming back. And it was almost surreal to have to go into the room and kiss my young children goodbye, drive to the airport, get on a plane, and disappear to another country for an indeterminate amount of time, and then get to come home for a few days after being in a totally different society and try to acclimate and appreciate everything that I had in my family and where I lived. And that was my existence for over 20 years, or I would say a generation. Now, when I look back on that, I remember 9/11. I remember how everyone was so passionate about coming together as a nation. There were flags everywhere. There was unity of purpose, and that was protecting and defending the United States of America. So as I sit here today, I look back on those 20 years, that one generation, and I wonder how we could have fallen so far, so fast, just a single generation, to where we went from standing and saluting the flag to see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and abandoning people that helped us, and dividing our own citizens over a virus that we still have yet to get the truth on. It's not an accident. These 20 years haven't been an accident. It's not an accident. They're telling you they want every child over 12 years old vaccinated. They want a generation here. The Taliban are taking every child 12 years old and older, every male, because they have to get rid of a generation. Now, this is not hyperbole. This is just pointing out the truth, the facts, and you have to ask yourself, why? Why 20 years later, as we look back on the most somber day in the recent history of our nation, where over almost 2,900 plus Americans lost their lives in a single day? Are we saying not only do we not forget this, but a lot of Americans aren't remembering it? President George W. Bush came out today, and I am just stunned by his statement, and I'm paraphrasing, that the events of 9/11 induced fear in the population and have led us to what we see in an insurrection on January 6th. That is beyond the pale of disingenuous. It's beyond the pale of the truth. Because America has never been motivated by fear in the past. It's been motivated by a patriotism, a love for nation, a love for their fellow man. They didn't care the color of their fellow man. They just loved the man on their left and their right. And we moved as one, as a nation. So why 20 years later is the former president during 9/11 not only not forgetting, but more importantly, not remembering how we got here? I think it's imperative today to speak the truth. I know there's a lot of guys like me that lost years, decades of their lives with their families doing something that we believed in, something that was bigger than we were and still are. In all candor, the only thing that keeps me and a lot of guys from eating a bullet is that we love God, and we have a sense of purpose in our life, and we understand that it's the process, not the outcome, that we're responsible for. So I would challenge you today, September 11th, 2021, to commit yourself to the purpose and the process of restoring the United States of America. I don't know what the outcome will be. But I do know that if we can't commit to the purpose and the process, this nation will go the way of so many great civilizations and commit self-suicide. They'll just suicide themselves from within, from feckless leadership, from flawed policy, from the direct result of monkey diplomacy. Because when you don't see something, you don't hear something, and you don't say something, it allows people who are driven by moral decay, self-ambition, and that are power hungry to take a great nation and just push it down the road to tyranny. Now, if I had have said this 15 years ago, you might not have believed it, but you can just look out your window today and see it. You can see the divisions caused by, do you mask, do you not mask? Do you vax, do you not vax? We have a president who doesn't have 3 functioning neurons coming out and demanding everyone become vaccinated, even though it's unconstitutional. They don't care. We had a former president who was attacked again and again by a false narrative. He was attacked by his own people in the government. Metaphorically, he was gone after by the Justice Department based on a false narrative. He was betrayed by his own staff. And the monkey diplomacy kicked in. We just seemed to see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, especially in the mainstream media, which is anything but a free press, hat tip Mark Levin. So today, on the anniversary of 9/11, I'm not going to ask you not only not to forget, I'm going to ask you to remember what life was like prior. Now, maybe you're young and you don't remember. Ask someone. Because now we start the next generation since 9/11, the next 20 years. And our actions these next 20 years will define the trajectory of our nation. Not only here, but in the world for generations. And it starts by remembering. It starts by remembering that when we went to Afghanistan, there were several hundreds, thousands of good people that supported us, and we need to not forget them. It starts by remembering that our government, our national central government, is designed to work for us, not for themselves. It starts by remembering the Constitution of the United States of America that has survived for 244 years, longer than any other constitution in the world, because the longest one next to ours is only about 17 years. It starts by remembering that the states have rights, and remembering federalism, remembering that we're a constitutional republic. We're not a democracy. It starts by remembering back when people spoke the truth, back when you had news stations like 60 Minutes during the swine flu, where Mike Wallace just absolutely destroyed the former CDC president or head of the CDC when they had lied about the swine flu vaccination. And it was a national news story that really helped save a nation from a terrible vaccine, because you could ask questions back then. It starts by remembering that. It starts by remembering that in our country there is freedom of speech, and in science we should always question and not use monkey diplomacy or monkey science where they say see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Just listen to the fact checkers that all come from liberal-sponsored think tanks that push a narrative that is drawing our country closer and closer to the point of no return and to a Marxist society. It starts by remembering. It starts by remembering all the people that sacrificed their lives, their livelihoods, their time, their years with their family in Afghanistan. And just doing what a nation should when it leaves, by remembering those that helped us and getting them out. And of course, those American citizens that are still there, getting them out. It starts by remembering that. It starts by remembering there's a rule of law that applies to everyone, that we do not live in a two-tiered justice system, but we live in one nation under God. It starts by remembering that we are so much stronger united and that we will not function as a nation divided. It starts by remembering that we can no longer have monkey diplomacy, where we see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. We can apply that immediately to Pakistan, that has been funding terror since the beginning of the Afghan conflict. I'll post a great article in our show notes that really will outline it, but I can summarize it by saying Pakistan has taken our money and turned around and supported the terrorist organizations that attacked American soldiers since the inception of Operation Enduring Freedom. And the only way we're going to fix that is to see evil, hear the evil, and speak up about it. Now, there are some wonderful people in Pakistan. I have some dear friends there. But the leadership there, and it even extends past their government to more of the ISI, their intelligence services, and their retired military leaders. Those are the guys that are pulling the strings, and those are the guys that are taking our money and then giving it to terrorists. It starts by remembering that Siraj Haqqani, who is now the Ministry of Interior in the Afghan government, and Sir Mirad Jawad, Tajmir Jawad, someone that ran one of the largest suicide bombing networks who worked with Siraj Haqqani and killed countless American soldiers, is the Assistant Deputy of Intelligence in Afghanistan. And those two are required, or actually are scrubbing the list of Americans that are still there, people that helped us that are still there, and they have their information, their biometric information, compliments of the State Department and our military leaders. It starts with remembering. That is the only way we're going to go forward as a nation. We have to remember the past to protect the future. We can no longer fall for the monkey diplomacy. And it starts today. I could point out example of what I'm talking about right now. I could talk about back when we had the Iranian hostage situation in 1979, where when they did the burn down of the embassy, they left shredded cables that had been put through shredders, but they weren't burned effectively. And the Iranians took those shredded cables to an airplane hangar. And they got a large group of people that were just, made silk rugs and their ancestors had been doing that for 500, 1,000 years. And they put them in this hangar and they were able to piece back all these cables together. And it caused a lot of people problems and some people their lives. And we learned from that lesson. We learned from that lesson because we remembered that in the intelligence community. And when we remembered that, we all of a sudden went to burn down procedures. We had to fix procedures for that. And if you want to understand that, and I'm not trying to confuse you here, just look at the pictures from the CIA base that are open source from Kabul. Everything is burned to a crisp because there's a procedure for it. The agency compound had a full burn down. My guess is they went on minimize, which they could only keep a minimum amount of classified material. And then when it came time to leave, they dumped everything in the disintegrators or in the burn barrels. They get to, 6,000 degrees. And they left, but they didn't leave behind any evidence that could hurt the people still in the country. Now you have to remember that to understand that we left the biometric scanners that the Taliban and the Haqqani terrorist network now have. We didn't throw them in the big disintegrators that you could put a bowling ball in and it would destroy it. No, we didn't do that. Although they were there, we didn't do that. We didn't follow any policy or procedure. So my question is, why? My question is, why did we leave all that great equipment, military equipment, classified, restricted weapons of war, instead of removing it to a pre-positioning areas like Oman, where we could have stored it indefinitely? Because we've used Oman to store gear many times. We used it in both the first Gulf Wars. We could have taken it to the UAE. We could have even taken it to Doha. There was no reason to give that equipment away. So my question is why? We have to remember that that shouldn't happen. And we have to ask the question, why and who signed off on it? At the end of the day, we have to remember what is correct to prevent the next generation from sinking further on the world stage and from living in tyranny. And it's up to us. As much as we are responsible for our actions, we are just as responsible for our inactions. So my challenge to you today is to remember, no longer fall for this monkey diplomacy, this monkey governance that says see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. It's time to stand. It's time to push back against the cancel culture. It's time to push back against a tyrannical government that's unmoored from the Constitution. Do it peacefully, civilly, but do it. It's no longer a time to point out and look, but a time to remember and act. Have a good weekend. Spend time with your family. Remember the past to protect the future, because it is the only way that we will keep freedom rolling.
Head high, protest line, freedom scribbled on your sign. Headline, New York Times, standing on the edge of a revolution. Hey, hey, just obey your secret safe with the NSA. In God we trust, or the CIA, standing on the edge of a revolution. Yeah, we're standing on the edge of a revolution.
The Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com.